I'm not stupid, just dumb. In fact, I'm a certified genius, at least by Mensa standards. I'm not a member, but I once took their test at the request of my wife. My wonderful wife. That's the whole story. I met her when I was a student at UT. I was in an honors course in the Macomb School of Business and I was in Plan 2. Everyone knows about Macomb's. It's always ranked in the top 10 business schools in the country. Plan 2 is less well known and much harder to get into. They only admit about 100 people each year. It's a liberal arts program started in the 1930s. Essentially, you take special ed courses that the university requires all students to take. These required courses are your major. They are all taught by academics at the university, and the classes are very small. My freshman English class had 9 students in it, and it counted toward my major. My American history class had 15 students, and that, too, was counted toward my major. This means that if your major was satisfied in your first 2 years, you could study whatever you wanted in your last 2 years. But most of us chose to double major. My choice was business school. Plan 2 advertises itself as Ivy League quality, and it is. It's also full of pretentious intellectuals. It was in Plan 2 that I met Katie. It was love at first sight on her part. Took me a little longer to pay attention to her. It wasn't that she wasn't beautiful. She was stunning by any standards. And by Plan 2 standards, she was Miss Universe. Her problem was that I hated the whole Plan 2 nonsense. I loved my courses, and I loved the professors, but I found that most intellectuals were not that smart. It wasn't much better at Macomb's. Not only was everyone trying to impress everyone else with how smart they were, but everyone was constantly bragging about what a great job they would get or how quickly they would make their second million. All those inflated peacock egos left little room for my modest ego. Of course, I had to attend the little faculty teas and lunches because that's where you got to know the professors, and they got to know you. The latter was crucial if you wanted to get those all-important letters of recommendation. Katie wasn't at Macomb's, but she started showing up at these meetings in addition to the Plan 2 meetings. I only know about this because she told me later. It wasn't until she showed up at my rugby match that I took notice of her. Rugby is not a UT sport, but the recreation department sponsors a club team. We not only play other big division teams, but we compete for the national title with universities across the country. We have a blast, and all of our girlfriends come to the competitions. Katie had been pursuing me for almost a year when I finally fell in love with her. At first sight, she had the most beautiful shade of red hair and white skin. Her figure was so striking that I blew off the scrimmage when I first spotted her, which was a cardinal sin for a player. After the game, we lost to Rice. I approached her to meet her. It was one of the scariest acts of my life. Katie is 5 feet 1 inch in every centimeter, and I'm 5 feet 3 inches with thick shoes. I'm a prop because I'm compact, and yes, I've heard all the jokes about short people and all the jokes about rug and street prostitutes. I don't find them funny.
I'm compact.
But I'm also one of the fastest and strongest guys on the team, and not just in terms of pounds. I've been accused of having a Napoleon complex because of my height. I don't think that's true. I just decided back in first grade that if anyone confused compactness with inadequacy, they would pay for their ignorance. I've always been a great athlete, as great as you can get for a guy 180 pounds tall. That meant I always made the main roster, but I was never a starter. I never even dreamed of an athletic scholarship. For some reason, Katie always made me feel like I was taller than her, even when she wore 3-inch heels. I loved it when she wore heels. It emphasized her perfect feet. But more importantly to me, it was proof that my height didn't matter. Katie was the girl of my dreams. I belonged to her completely from the moment she smiled at me. She came from a poor family deep in East Texas. Her father was injured in the oil fields and died after getting drunk in a car accident when Katie was in 2nd grade. Her mother was an office worker at a small insurance agency, and Katie was on a full academic scholarship, though I'm sure she could have gotten a need-based scholarship if necessary. We officially met in the fall of my junior year and married in the middle of my senior year. The only thing we fought about was sex. I wanted it on the first date and Katie didn't. I was a virgin, and Katie wasn't. Before Katie, I was buddy-buddy with all the girls. I had dates, but on them I always heard about who they really wanted to date. I knew I could get sympathy sex, but I wanted a girl who wanted me. Katie told me that she had one boyfriend in high school. She was sure she was going to marry him but discovered he was cheating on her. She made a solemn vow not to have sex until after the wedding. It made me admire her. She kept her word, her vow meant something. I knew there were times before we were married when she wanted me as much as I wanted her, but she never lost her head. It gave me confidence in her and inspired me to do the same. Our first non-sex-related fight didn't happen until after we were married, and it was very unpleasant at the time. She decided I was going to go work for my parents. I love my parents. They own 4 franchises in Houston. No, not McDonald's, but you've probably eaten at one of them, or at least seen the commercials on TV. Each location brings in $75,000 to $100,000 a year, so my folks live pretty well. Not Texas rich, but quite comfortably. My dad wanted to expand but couldn't without management help. The only management help he trusted was family. By family, he meant me. I am 4 years older than my sister, and she had made it clear as early as kindergarten that she was going to medical school. He offered us a great incentive plan. I wanted to stay in Austin, not just so Katie could finish her degree. I loved that city, and I hated Houston. I already had my eye on a small Austin computer company that was just starting out. It wasn't Dell, but I thought they had the best business model. When Katie saw the package they were offering me, she dropped her arguments. And right after graduation, we bought our first house. Life was good, but Dell was growing and my company wasn't. Soon, I was on the street for the first time. Luckily, I cashed out my stock options early and decided now was a good time to get my MBA. I chose Wharton and graduated in 2 years. I got a great job at one of the big banks in Austin, and life was good again. I caught the real estate boom in Austin and then boom and boom. We had 2 kids and lived in an overly large lakeside house with his and her Beamers. Then, after 10 years of marriage, I decided I didn't care about being a multimillionaire, and I was tired of working for someone else. I told Katie I wanted to start my own business and used most of our liquid assets to buy a franchise, the same one my father owned. I had never worked in any of my father's establishments, and it was more difficult to run than I thought it would be. At first, we didn't understand what Dad's stores did, but we never missed a meal. What I didn't tell Katie was that my real desire was to write. The old Plan 2 bug had finally bitten me. I started spending most of my time in my office writing. I didn't want Katie to find out about my perversions until I was published and made to pay for my delusions. All she could see was that we were only making a fraction of what I was making, and I wasn't pushing to expand. We weren't keeping up with the Joneses, let alone all the DeLones. Even the assembly workers at Dell were making millions on options who lived around us. Yes, we lived and partied with a very competitive crowd in laid-back Austin. The philosophy was, whoever had the most toys won, and toys were expensive. Before I even started writing, I decided I didn't need the toys anymore. To be honest with Katie, this decision was not discussed or mutual. And then we had our next fight. This went on for almost a year, and life in our house became hell. Then, almost overnight, the fighting stopped. But that wasn't all that almost stopped. The sex and affection stopped too. Yet I didn't suspect a thing. I'm not stupid. I knew money was very important to Katie, but I thought I could earn it by being a writer. Had I researched how much writers make, I might have changed my mind. But this was another case of ignorance being bliss. I finished my first book and started looking for an agent. I finished my second book, and agents started responding to my emails. I finished my third book, and one morning, I got that all-important call from my publisher. She was going to buy all 3 books. What's more, she was willing to give me an advance of $30,000 for each one. For an unpublished writer, that's success. I had a small microdictaphone that I used to speak dialogue out loud before I wrote it for my books. Overjoyed, I got permission to record the publisher's offer to impress Katie. I called Katie and told her we were going to celebrate. I told her to hire a babysitter and dress in her best for dinner. I was taking her to Green Pastures, one of the best restaurants in Austin. Her lack of enthusiasm should have set off red lights and alarm bells. Heck, she wasn't enthusiastic about going to the best place in Austin in the middle of the week. That should have set off flares and air raid sirens. We arrived at the restaurant, a restored southern mansion, early enough to see peacocks roaming the grounds. We were ushered into a romantic room with an immaculate table. I ordered a milk punch and Katie ordered a margarita. I could feel her tense throughout dinner. I should have known something was wrong, but I was too excited. I decided to wait until dessert to surprise her. But then her cell phone rang. "We're at dinner." "You're kidding me. Here? Now?" "No, not until this weekend." She stopped mid-sentence again, then giggled. "No, I told you how I want to do it. I can't please Mike. Not here." She sighed, listened for a moment, and then asked, "Are you sure? Just like we've been practicing." She listened some more, and I saw her face stiffen. I had already pulled out the microdictaphone to play for her, but some instinct made me start recording when she said, "Please, Mike. Not here." "Okay. But you better be here. It won't be pretty." "Okay. I love you too." She hung up the phone and looked at me with a look I'd never seen before. It was an implacable, denigrating look. "I'm going to leave you, you shrimp. I can't live with a wuss. And I can't live with a loser. I've been having an affair for the last 6 months. I hate you. I only married you because I thought you would succeed. And you're a big loser. So I'm not going to allow even partial custody. I'll consider giving you unofficial, off-the-record visits. If not, well, they're unlucky with your DNA. But I won't allow them to be polluted by your tiny ambitions. I'm not stupid. I knew Katie had married me because she thought I'd get her where she wanted to go. But I never expected this development. I guess I didn't react the way she expected me to because it was such a drastic change from the way she was acting before the call. I wasn't going to lose my temper over temporary lunacy. And then it hit me. She was trying to provoke me into violence. I had never hit her, but she knew I had a temper in some matters. She knew me and expected me to hit her in a public place. With cold calculation, I mouthed, "Katie, I love you. Why are you doing this?" Her face contorted in a disgusted grin, and her voice rose almost to a scream. "I was willing to put up with you, you little squeak, just so you'd go somewhere. I told you 100 times. I didn't want to be a lower-middle-class housewife. You wouldn't listen. It wouldn't be so bad if you had any idea how to satisfy a woman. I've always hated you in bed." One of the things I'd learned from playing sports was to keep my cool under pressure. I didn't know why Katie was talking so loud, but I could see the maitre d' approaching us. "Katie, keep it down or we'll get kicked out of here. I love you. I've never cheated on you, and even if you have, I want to work it out. The only thing that needs to be worked out, wee man, is how much time you're going to spend with the kids and how much you're willing to pay for it." Now she was panting with real anger. By showing restraint and controlling my temper, she was losing both. However, she did lower her voice and hissed, "Are you willing to come home and sleep with me after a real man, for the right to see your children?" I clenched my jaw and replied as coldly as possible, "Were the kids in the house when you were entertaining your real man?" She looked confused for a second and then chuckled. "Of course they were. I was just telling them I found a lucky car when they heard me finish. Katie, I heard you make arrangements for him to pick you up. I'm on my way home now. I'll help you move out tomorrow. I will not allow this kind of behavior in front of my children. I think all further conversations will have to go through our lawyers." Her face contorted into a mask of pure anger. "I'm going to get you for everything. It won't be enough to make up for years of pretending, but what can you expect from someone so small? I'm going to marry Mike. He's 6 feet 2 inches, a pediatrician, and can afford the best of everything. If you try to fight for the kids, I'll ruin you." I turned off the tape and said very quietly, "I can't believe you're that stupid. I understand that you're going after money, but don't you realize that any man who cheats on you like that will do the same to you? He won't fight hard for kids he doesn't want. And if he does marry you, I'll bet you $10,000 it won't last 2 years." I stood up and walked over to the maitre d'. I handed him my credit card and told him to check it immediately because I would be canceling it in 10 minutes. Katie had already gathered her things and slipped out the door. When the manager brought me the check, he was an acquaintance I had met at local restaurant association meetings. He looked at me sympathetically and whispered, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing. You know the best divorce attorney in Austin is dining here tonight." She was trying her best to be discreet, but he nodded toward an elegantly dressed couple sitting at a nearby table. I recognized her. Sensing my stare, she raised her head and looked at me sympathetically. But her body language said, "Please don't bother me at dinner." I pulled out my business card, put it on the table and said, "I don't want to spoil your dinner, but I would like to meet you as soon as you can fit me into your schedule." I found a folder. I had just broken a 20. She reached over and took my 10, leaving me with a couple of units and said, "Okay, you hired me. Now go home. Continue to keep your cool, and don't let her push you out of the house. I'll be there as soon as I finish dinner. I don't like being ambushed like this. Do you know who her lawyer is?" I didn't know we were in trouble. I didn't know she was having an affair. I set it up to tell her I just sold my books. "Have you signed a contract yet?" "No, I just got the news." "Don't sign until I tell you. You don't need it to become common property. Dad, take care of it. George needs my help." "You don't remember me, do you, George?" I looked at her again. I knew I'd seen her, but aside from Jim's divorce, I didn't think we'd ever met. Austin doesn't have a lot of social hangouts, but it has its peculiarities. Politicians, lawyers, and the like tend to gather in a different crowd than those I used to socialize with in the tech industry. For the last 3 years, I'd barely been out in the community. I recognized her but was still trying to remember her name. Seeing my efforts, she smiled and said, "I'm Christine Harris. We went to Plan 2 and McCombs together. There weren't many of us in both. I thought you might remember." Grabbing my hand and leading me out of the restaurant, she asked, "Where did you park?" I pointed to my battered SUV, which I could now see had at least 2 flat tires. "They really don't play fair, do they? Are your kids home?" I replied that they were as she led me to her car and drove, well, like a bat out of hell to my house. When we got there, she handed me babysitting money and told me, "Go to the computer and start closing accounts and transferring money to your business accounts. It's still common property, but draining money from the account could be a felony, and I don't think her lawyer would allow it. I'll wait for the happy couple to arrive." I was just finishing up when Christine found me. They weren't as well prepared as they should have been. I think they rushed it. They planned it for later but decided tonight was too good to pass up. They made a big mistake when they left the house together. "I want you to call a locksmith and have all the locks changed tonight. Disable the garage door opener. Do you have someone you trust completely to take care of your children?" I thought for a second and said, "My sister lives in Georgetown. Takes half an hour to drive there. She works at the Scott and White Clinic in Temple. I trust her." "Great. How old is your youngest?" "Cindy will be 3 in a month. Josh is almost 5. He'll be going to kindergarten in the fall. Scott and White is a very prestigious firm." "What does your sister do there?" "She's a neonatal surgery specialist. She just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. And she has a son the same age as Cindy." "Great. Get a locksmith out here as soon as possible." "Do you think your sister will drop everything and come at a time like this?" I grimaced. "Let's just say Kathy wasn't one of her favorite people. She won't go as fast as you, but she'll be here with bells on. And while she'll never say it out loud, it's not one, 'I told you so.'" Christine's face softened. "That's the kind of crap I don't get married over. I guess after all these years, I'm used to it. But look, would it hurt you if I prayed for you?" Shocked, I looked at Christine as a person for the first time. She was one of the good guys. I nodded nervously, and she continued, "I suspect these two are going to call it a night. But if they contact their lawyer, your wife will be back here so we can't claim desertion." I pulled a pretty big bluff. I told them that you didn't want to let them in the house and informed them that you promised to call the police if they tried to come in. Along the way, I managed to get something close to that out of you. But you really have no grounds to deny access to the marital home until she leaves. When I'm under stress, I make bad jokes. You drive so much, I'd offer half a kingdom to get you to slow down. She threw me one of those looks that women seem to learn in the womb, ignored my humor, and continued. They act both smart and stupid, so I'm willing to bet they act on their own. I'm pretty sure I know the nefarious lawyer who counseled them, and I've never heard a lawyer joke that was fair to him. If they had followed his instructions, he would have been at the restaurant with a photographer. Bottom line, if she goes out for the night, you could have a case for desertion. My sister arrived, surprised at my restraint, made a few remarks about Katie, whom she had hated for years, then took the children back to her house. A locksmith came and changed the locks and code on the garage door. Christine connected to her office computer through mine, printed out some papers and asked me to sign them. She also asked me to sign her contract. I shuddered at the thought of what I had already spent that evening. It wasn't until she was leaving that I remembered to give her the tape of what Kathy had told me. Have you ever seen a shark smile? It's not pretty, even if it's your shark. The divorce was ugly and expensive. Katie got more than I thought she deserved, but I got full physical custody of the kids. She didn't even get visitation rights, although I unofficially agreed to give her full access to them whenever she wanted, as long as she notified me and didn't leave them on my property. On the day we got out of court, I packed up all of my belongings and we set off for Ireland. I rented a small, secluded cottage near a tiny village on the west coast, not far from Doolin. Best place in the world if you're a fan of traditional Irish music. I enrolled my kids in the local school and settled into the local pubs. One of the nice things about the writing craft is that we can work anywhere and write off living in strange places as a tax expense. Exploring local color, don't you know? It took Kathy and her new husband's pile of money almost 6 months to find me. When she called, I immediately agreed to have the kids come to live with her, but warned her that we had just finished packing and were moving in the morning. The household stuff was already gone. I told her that she might want to wait until we were settled in the new house. I said I would let her know as soon as we were settled in. How long does it take to get settled in? I figured about the same amount of time it would take her to find me. I hung up, remembering to let her know where we were moving to. In that time, I managed to write a bestseller. No, it didn't become #1, but for 1 week, it took the penultimate spot on the New York Times bestseller list. It was about a pediatrician in Austin who was a secret pedophile. He was a horrible creature, and one reviewer said, "My doctor is one of the classic villains of all time." For some reason, Kathy's husband, a pediatrician, lost a significant portion of his practice right after the book became a hit. He was forced to leave his practice and move to Lubbock, where he took a job at a medical school. 3 months later, Kathy and more of her husband's money found me again. We moved to the wilds of the Scottish Highlands, about 100 miles north of Inverness, near John O'Groats. I apologized for not contacting her sooner, but explained that when we were almost settled in, I discovered I had allergies, and we had to move again. The house was packed up, and we were leaving that afternoon. I was going to drive around the Algarve to find suitable accommodation. I promised to contact her as soon as we were settled in. As I hung up the phone, I realized that I had no problems with allergies in Ireland. Plus, they spoke English there. I thought I might try a small town on the south coast this time. It's nice to be a best-selling author. Doing local research in a remote location, strangers stand out. Locals, wary of most outsiders, will welcome eccentric writers and let them know if anyone starts asking questions. In Scotland, for example, I was given almost a full week's notice. My next book also hit the bestseller list, 3rd from the bottom, and stayed there for 2 weeks. It was about a nefarious pedophile pediatrics professor from Austin who got a job at a medical school in Leck. This villain conducted unauthorized experiments on his students, rendering them infertile and impotent. In a strange coincidence, Kathy's husband, a pediatrician, decided he didn't want to work at the medical school after finding out about it. He joined the public health service instead. By another strange coincidence, I decided that my next book might focus on a scandal involving a pedophile, a former medical school professor who now works for the Public Health Service. There's an old expression about never picking a fight with an organization that buys ink by the barrel. Or is the pen mightier than the sword? I did, however, keep in touch with Austin. That evil divorce lawyer started flying in to visit us. When I was first living in Ireland, she followed me to Scotland and then back to Ireland. She was worse than Jiminy Cricket. I listened to endless arguments about keeping children away from their mother. Only she never phrased it that way. She just talked about cases she'd handled where the mother ran away, isolating the children from a good father. I'm no fool, and I would have been outraged by that. But Lord, this woman's kisses made my toes tingle. After a year or so, the sultry way she said hello on the phone was almost enough to cause arousal. Or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't come out of my pants the whole time. I just wasn't interested in women at first. But Christine had hit a nerve. What is it about my character flaw that attracts women who don't believe in premarital sex? I'm just glad Christine used the same definition as Kathy. Nearly 18 months after the divorce, I returned to Austin. Christine had finally put her hands down. I knew she hated Kathy, but she said what I was doing to the kids was immoral, and she wouldn't get engaged to an immoral man. I make tons of money off men who try to be a daddy to their kids when the wife and her new love go to Timbuktu, she said. I think it's evil when a man does it. It doesn't look any better. Your game is sweet, and I don't care what you do to her, but she will always be their mother. We can't change that. You're in your right. But is it moral? She got me, and she knew it. There's nothing prettier than when a shark smile is accompanied by schadenfreude. I'd like to think I was responding solely to Christine's moral argument, but it may have been her comment about how her biological clock was failing her. She insisted that her children be born and raised as Texans. I proposed in a castle I rented for the weekend. We were married in the church of her childhood near El Paso. The moving company's truck had just pulled into the driveway of our new lake house in Austin when Katie called me on my cell phone. She was desperate and crying. She begged me to let her see the kids. I guess the anger had dissipated. Or maybe I was getting softer in my old age. Or maybe it was the way Christine looked at me. I agreed to let her see the kids. 30 seconds later, she knocked on the door. I wasn't really surprised. It had been a long game of cat and mouse, but she knew who to thank for me not playing it anymore. Opening the door, I said, "Here are the ground rules. You will be electronically monitored. First, if you say one bad thing about me, I will move to Timbuktu, and you will never see them again. Second, if I catch the slightest sign that you are contesting custody, we will leave. However, if you follow my rules, I will allow you to participate in their lives from now on. I will do my best to help you rebuild your relationship with them. You will be able to attend all of their games and school events. Do you agree? Yes or no?" That's the last word I want to hear from you. With tears in her eyes, she nodded and replied, "Yes." Then she turned to Christine and murmured, "Thank you." I have to admit, I felt really bad about poisoning the kids' feelings for her. I wasn't proud of what they said to her when she joined them in our new backyard. Kids can be so cruel. She kept her word, though, and after about 6 months, things ended for them as well as a divorce can end. It's always hard, but Katie changed too. She started teaching kindergarten, devoted herself completely to all of her children, and followed all of my rules, including never saying a word to me. She even seemed content to live on her modest paycheck. The funny thing is, it's clear to anyone who knows Katie that she's in love with me. Katie is one of those women whose love needs a strong man. It's just a shame she didn't know she was marrying one. And me? For some reason, I keep softening up. But sharks can be very persuasive, especially when they give you that special smile. Husbands, you know the kind. Christine and I are expecting our second child. I have realized how wonderful a marriage of equal partners can be. Most of all, I've learned how a strong woman's love can make a man a better man. Happiness is an incomplete word to describe what we have. Who would have thought I would learn to love the smile of a shark?